A long time ago, a friend told our heroine that this life belonged only to her. He advised not to succumb to the influence of his mother and continue to live his life. These words surfaced in her memory, and the girl did not understand why. However, it was unusually cold. She curled up and trembled all over. The cold enveloped her from head to toe. The blonde touched the floor with her hand. It turned out to be very cold and hard. It seemed to be made of stone. The girl remembered that if you sleep on a cold floor, you can get sick. It was still unclear to her how she ended up in such inhuman conditions. Rising, Leah shook her head slightly. She suddenly felt an unbearable pain. Her whole body ached. She grabbed her shoulder with her hand. The pupils of her eyes widened in surprise. The girl looked around slowly, trying to figure out where she was. The room looked suspiciously empty and resembled a basement. Inside, there was only one iron door and dim lighting. Leah carefully stood up and approached her warily. The girl tried to open it, but in vain. She realized that she was locked here. There was something pleading in her gaze, and her eyebrows frowned slightly. In a fit of mild panic, she began to pull the handle again. And yet the gates did not budge. Now my hands were shaking not from cold but from excitement. Leah began to guess that she had been kidnapped. The girl tried to understand who did this and for what purpose. Her meager financial resources could not be considered the reason for this. Bad thoughts began to creep into my head. Trafficking in organs, people, or even a serial maniac. An even bigger problem was that the heroine did not remember anything. In her last memories, she was sitting in a cafe with her friend. Leah told her about her upcoming internship in another country. Everyone went to study abroad, but she couldn't afford it. The friend was clearly not happy with this news. With all her appearance, she showed disapproval. She asked how long the girl's departure would last. Leah replied that she planned to leave for a year. If all goes well, she may stay longer. The interlocutor frowned. She thought it must have taken the other a long time to gather the strength to tell all this. The blonde slowly drank a sip of plain water. She stated that she did not want anyone to know about this. The interlocutor muttered that she was simply running away. Leah decided to remind her friend of her own words. You need to be free and live your own life. That's why the girl decided to take this action. She wanted to learn something new and test herself. The heroine also did not want to hear about this from her friend. She became pregnant before finishing school and decided to quit school to get married. In response, she angrily snapped that it was her choice. She realized that the girl was still angry with her for this incident. Like mine, Leah muttered, frowning. The heroine confidently stood up from the table, handing the letter to her interlocutor. She said that she would not be able to catch the birth of the child. Therefore, Leah decided to congratulate her in advance. The girl warned that she no longer uses social networks. Therefore, you will be in touch only after your return. She also noted that it is not necessary to accompany her to the airport. Now Leah deeply regretted the words she had spoken earlier. She didn't even have the chance to apologize to her friend. The girl held her head in her hands, blaming herself. Suddenly, recent memories began to return to her. She remembered how she was in a hurry because she was late for the plane. She then arrived at the airport in France. There was loud bustle and noise there. Raised voices and shouts of people were heard somewhere. It looked like the dispute was in full swing. The girl's stomach suddenly began to growl. She instantly grabbed him with both hands. Leah assumed that she had eaten something wrong on the plane. Setting her glass of coffee on the seat, she headed to the restroom. Many people said that in Europe it is difficult to get there. That's all the girl remembered. The rest was a blur. Then she realized that all her things were gone. Phone, passport, and also a handbag and suitcase. Leah approached the door hopefully. She had already raised her hand to knock, but suddenly she heard unfamiliar voices. Someone's steps were approaching her room. The girl was at a loss, not knowing what to do. An idea popped into her head. The stranger began to open the door and it creaked open. In the cool room, he noticed a sleeping girl with long hair. Leah was scared to death. She couldn't even breathe normally. The sound of distinct approaching footsteps echoed. The girl's stomach hurt again. She thought she was going to throw up. In addition, there was no latrine in this basement. An unfamiliar person stood behind the girl. She did not show that she was conscious. She was horrified when she realized it was the kidnapper. Then he took a few confident steps and stopped right in front of Leah. She did not understand what was happening, while at the same time burning with curiosity. It was too dark to see anything. Opening her eyes slightly, she saw black men's shoes. Leah continued to feel unbearable pain in her stomach. If she vomited on this man's shoes, he would probably be furious. The girl thought she had definitely gone crazy, because in such a situation her thoughts wandered around such insignificant things. Suddenly, an unfamiliar silhouette spoke. He called the situation strange. The girl should have woken up by now. The blonde said that he had never made a mistake with the dosage. He guessed their victim was heavier than he looked. Leah found this offensive. The hostage then realized exactly what the man had said. Dosage. He probably put drugs in that coffee. That explained why she didn't remember anything. All because of the drug. Obviously, the villain did this to kidnap Leah. She wondered why he needed this. The man said he would have to check it himself. The girl tensed. She ordered herself not to move because any movement could only worsen the situation. The blonde sat down slowly. He carefully examined the hostage. Suddenly, her stomach growled loudly. The man grinned. He told his partner that there had been a mistake. They grabbed the wrong man. He asked what their next steps were. They couldn't just let her go. This could cause an international problem. The blonde offered to kill the girl. Leah felt cold sweat break out on her forehead. She didn't want to die. If it was the kidnapper's fault, then he should have just let her go. She saw nothing but his shoes. The second man rejected the idea. He said killing would be a waste of time. Besides, the hostage has a beautiful face. The girl breathed a sigh of relief. At least one of them was sane. The man continued, grinning. He said that it would be nice to have such a talent in his harem. These words made Leah very tense. If they manage to please him, they will win his favor. And at the same time, they will get rid of this woman. The blonde clearly liked this idea. Unexpectedly for Leah, this man approached her again. He gently grabbed her wrist. Then she felt something sharp pierce her skin. The kidnapper gave her an injection. In a whisper, he told her to sleep a little longer. When the girl wakes up, she will find herself in a completely different world. The blonde began to slowly count to 3. Leah realized something. He knew that she was conscious. The sleeping pills worked quickly. The girl instantly fell into a deep sleep, making a sound like snoring. Leah had a dream. The events took place at noon. She was calmly returning home after school. Entering the house, the girl entered her PIN code and the doors opened easily. She was going to tell her mom that she was back. However, what she saw made her mouth freeze in amazement. The heavy yellow briefcase fell to the floor with a crash. A completely naked man stood in front of her. He quickly guessed that the schoolgirl was the very daughter her mother was talking about. In a cheerful tone, the stranger told her to come closer. From that moment on, they were to live together. What he did to her turned out to be a real nightmare. Eventually, Leah woke up. Sitting up, she rubbed her eyes from her sleep. The girl was wondering why she now remembered this disgusting incident. Having completely recovered, the heroine looked around in surprise. In addition to her, there were many girls in the huge room. They were all talking animatedly about something. The girl began to wonder who all these women were. Suddenly, the words of the kidnappers appeared in her memory. Leah clutched her head in her hands, dumbfounded. She didn't want to believe what happened. It turns out they were actually talking about a real harem. The situation did not fit in the girl's head. It's the 21st century. The idea of a real harem seemed to her something archaic and inconsistent with modern realities. It was simply impossible. Nervous, the girl began to fidget restlessly in place. Suddenly, she accidentally pushed the tall brunette, whom she had not previously noticed. That evil was expressed in a language Leah did not understand. It turns out that all these women were also kidnapped. She felt that something was wrong. It all seemed real, but at the same time it wasn't. The girl tried to calm herself down. Either way, denying reality will do nothing to help her escape. This place looked different from where she had been before. The walls were made of sand bricks. Rectangular columns supported the high ceiling. The interior was reminiscent of Egyptian pyramids. In the far corner, there was a staircase leading to a door. Suddenly, the shrill sound of jangling keys broke the silence. The doors opened and 3 people dressed in unusual outfits entered the room. The white-haired woman in the middle seemed scary to the heroine. She had a hard time understanding what was happening here. The girl decided that it was better to hide, so she slowly began to crawl back. The woman began to carefully examine each of the hostages. A girl with blonde hair approached her with a confident look. She noisily expressed her complaints and tried to find out something. The formidable mistress did not even listen to her words. Silently and mercilessly, she slapped her in the face. Then the woman suddenly grabbed the poor girl by the hair. She easily threw it into the wall. The captives were scared. Some of them began to whisper to each other. The hostess issued a warning in an angry tone. Anyone who tries to escape will be killed. She had no intention of holding anyone back. The women said that no one had ever successfully escaped from this place. Anyone who tries is doomed to die. He will be eaten alive by beetles in the dungeons of this castle. Dead silence reigned in the room. Leah was scared as hell. Goosebumps ran all over her body from her feet to her head. The hostess told the girls to remember only one thing. To be chosen by him is a great happiness. However, the heroine did not agree with this. Appearance is the only thing Leah inherited from her mother. One evening she told her that she wanted to attend night school. The girl liked to study and wanted to go to college. Her mother was a busty beauty. She absolutely did not understand her daughter. With such a face and body, she did not need such a life. The woman believed that Leah should have simply found herself a worthy man. This was a guarantee that her daughter's life would be successful and prosperous. Morning has come. The rays of the sun softly made their way into the room. They penetrated through the arched window, illuminating the space with golden light. Leah continued to lie in bed unhappily, not wanting to get up. Her loose hair was tangled, creating a mess. A week has passed since the girl was brought to this palace. She tried to gather information about this place in every possible way. A maid entered the room. Her name was Ruru. Her hair was pulled back into a long, neat braid. Smiling, she politely asked how the lady slept. Each captive was assigned a servant. Leah guessed that they were carefully trained, because it was quite difficult to get any information about this place, and even about the current situation. The maid asked what the girl would like to wear today. She muttered in a sleepy voice that she didn't care. Leah continued to wander in her thoughts. She managed to find out only a little. She was in the old city. It housed a palace and government buildings. This harem was significantly different from those described in history books. However, this was not surprising. This culture disappeared at the beginning of the 20th century. Worried, Ruru said that this would not work. The lady had to get dressed. Leah sighed sadly. She didn't see the man who supposedly chose them anywhere. In fact, she didn't want to see him. After all, he was the one who kidnapped her and dragged her into this mess. This fact irritated the girl terribly. Who knows, maybe it was a nasty, fat old man. Leah considered this an abomination. The girl was seized by a tremor. Anxious thoughts did not give her peace. She couldn't just run away. If there's anything worse than death, it's a dungeon full of bugs. The employee interrupted the flow of negative thoughts. She asked the lady to come with her. She needed to prepare a bath for the girl and give her a massage. Finally getting out of bed, Leah nodded approvingly. Apparently it was much better than bugs. The girl promised herself that she would try never to catch the eye of him. It was as if she didn't exist. Ruru deftly began to wash the mistress. There were rumors that there was a woman who died while innocent. This happened because she was never chosen. If Leah is lucky, this will be her fate. Relaxing, the girl closed her eyes. The words of her psychologist came to mind. Leah had to accept reality as it was. There was no point in wasting time on things you couldn't control. Suddenly, the door of the mistress's room swung open without knocking. Another maid entered. Her name was Lana. Ruru worriedly asked her colleague what had happened. She replied that the meeting would take place in exactly an hour. All the ladies insisted on changing again. Leah didn't like this news. Complaining, Lana said that they were always the same problems. Her mistress was already hysterical. Having conveyed the message, the maid left the room in a hurry. Leah slowly walked out of the bath. With wet feet, she stepped onto the floor and approached Rur. The girl asked what was so special about this meeting. The maid said that the mistress would appear for the first time. If Leah is lucky, they will choose her. The girl was a little confused by the word, choose. The lady thought for a moment. There are many beautiful women in the Near East. Therefore, she very much doubted that she would have a chance. Leah wondered what would happen if she was unlucky. Ruru rushed to console the girl, clasping her hands together enthusiastically. She promised to do everything possible to highlight the mistress. Leah pleadingly grabbed the maid by the shoulders. She tearfully begged her not to do this. This reaction surprised the woman. The girl began to look for excuses. She suggested saying that she wasn't feeling well and that's why she decided to stay. The maid calmly replied that the chief eunuch himself would come for the mistress. Leah sighed heavily, feeling disappointed. Mid-daylight. The sun rose high above the horizon. The city was enveloped in bright light and warming warmth. Small clouds slowly floated in the sky. The Prime Minister was in Carrion's chambers. They were discussing about a woman who until recently worked as a mercenary. The ruler was aware that she had escaped. He decided to ask his subordinate whether this meant that she had left the country. The man in the white robe said he wasn't sure. However, there was still a chance that she was still here. Carrion thoughtfully raised his hand to his chin. He was dissatisfied with the answer, because all he heard was uncertainty. The Prime Minister also had news. He was informed that new girls had been brought into the harem. The man looked at his subordinate with disgust. He confidently stated that he had said many times that His Highness did not care about this. The Prime Minister assured him that he remembered everything perfectly. The ruler expressed the opinion that these girls were disgusting, like parasites. Carrion tried to end the conversation rudely, but the man reminded him of the escaped mercenary. She still had to have a goal that she was pursuing. The ruler began to understand what he was hinting at. His blue eyes focused on one point, full of reflection and deep attention. The Prime Minister did not give up trying to interest Carrion in the harem. He noted that some of these girls were gifts from the nobility. Moreover, unlike the previous order, women in the harem could walk freely around the courtyard. The ruler chuckled interestedly in response. He gave the order to examine all the girls. This important event was called a meeting by the men. Carrion looked sternly at his subordinate. They were obliged to personally examine the girls, because there is a possibility that the enemy has disguised himself among them. The white-robed man bowed slowly. He assured Carrion of his readiness to carry out his orders. Coming out of his chambers, the Prime Minister breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, he could allow himself to relax. When one incident occurred in the palace, this country was filled with anxiety and confusion. Suddenly, the man began to sob. He thought it made him look like an idiot. Having calmed down, the Prime Minister began to think. It seemed to him that a king was determined not by blood ties but by higher powers in heaven. Leah decided to choose her own dress, and when the maid saw this, she was dumbfounded with shock. She asked her if she had made a mistake in choosing this particular outfit for the meeting. The girl did not understand what caused confusion among the servants. Ruru asked where the lady found these clothes. She also pointed out the excessive ordinariness of this outfit. Leah asked what was wrong with looking simple. At this time, the maid carefully examined the girl's face. She thought she looked bad. Then she noticed that the mistress had not put on makeup. This is exactly what Leah wanted. In her defense, she said that it was fashionable now. She liked to look natural. If a man's eyesight is normal, he will never choose a girl among these painted peacocks. Exactly an hour has passed. Almost all the young ladies have already gathered in the main hall. It was decorated with elaborate curtains and sparkling chandeliers. Everything turned out exactly as Leah expected. The ladies were dressed in amazing dresses. Their faces seemed perfect, as if created for perfection. The charming appearance of women had its effect. The girl could not take her eyes off them. The lady sighed with relief. She was glad that now she would probably not attract the attention of the ruler. Leah accidentally overheard the conversation of one of the ladies. There were rumors that this man was the king's regent, and in fact he is his eldest son. All powers were transferred to him since the king was very ill. The lady heard almost nothing from the noise of the crowd. One of the girls continued. She heard that he was a cruel tyrant. Even ministers and officials trembled with fear. The second lady stated that during meetings he could throw things and overturn tables. Her friend called it extremely cruel. Also, his name was Carrion, which means darkness. Leah thought that this was not surprising. After all, this man has a dungeon full of insects. Even his name sounded ominous. An employee's voice was heard in the hall. He announced the arrival of Regent Carrion. All the girls tensed, not knowing what to expect. Leah clumsily backed away just in case. The girl decided not to even look in his direction, but involuntarily looked up. At the same moment, Regent Carrion entered the room. The lady could not see him carefully. However, the man was taller than she thought. He wasn't a fat old man at all. Leah turned her gaze to the women standing in front. They tried their best to look attractive in order to be chosen. The silhouette of her mother appeared before her eyes. He still instructed her to look for a worthy man and forget about studying. However, the girl did not want this. Regent Carrion began to walk around the hall, carefully examining each of the ladies. Suddenly, it seemed to Leah that he turned his gaze to her. The next moment, the man turned around and walked away. The Prime Minister and the hostess stood there fiercely, watching what was happening. The lady's face was covered with cold sweat. It was scary. She thought she saw a glimpse of blue for a moment. The girl was incredibly bored. Not that she had anything to do once she got back to the room. She was looking forward to it all being over. Leah was completely immersed in her own thoughts, forgetting about what was happening. She missed her cell phone incredibly. The girl wondered if there was even internet in this country. Her thoughts were interrupted by a rough male voice. Raising her head, the lady noticed Regent Carrion. The terrifying trio stood right in front of her. Suddenly, the girl screamed and jumped up. The ruler remained standing in place, expressing bewilderment. Leah quickly fell silent, covering her mouth with her hand. She still couldn't believe her own eyes. A bright blush covered her cheeks, speaking of inner excitement. The man asked the girl's name. Leah stood there, unable to say a word. It was impossible. Everything seemed wrong. The ruler turned out to be incredibly attractive. He stared at the girl with an eagle's gaze, waiting for an answer. She continued to look at his distinct facial features, stunned. The hostess turned to Leah with displeasure. She said the regent asked her name. She should have already answered his question. Suddenly, the man turned around and said that it didn't matter anymore. He didn't understand how, with such an appearance, she managed to get to this place. Laughter and ridicule were heard from the crowd. Regent Carrion silently left the room. Exhaling, the lady thanked God that she managed to avoid trouble. She was glad that the man ignored her, but at the same time it made her terribly angry. After the meeting, the trio moved along a corridor with arched windows. The sun was still shining brightly outside. The branches of the trees swayed smoothly in the wind. The Prime Minister spoke first. He asked the regent's opinion. Didn't it seem to him that the new girls looked quite decent? He ignored his question. The man turned to the white-haired woman. He heard that she was the one in charge of managing the harem. She nodded in agreement. Carrion demanded a full account of their names, origins, and patrons. The woman expressed her consent without any doubt. The regent mentioned the girl he was approaching. The man instantly fell silent and said that it didn't matter. Turning around, he walked away. After the meeting, Leah was in her room. Boredom drove her to the point where she decided to start dusting. The maid entered the chamber. She asked how the meeting with her mistress went. Leah replied that nothing special happened. As soon as Leah mentioned Carrion, the door slammed open. The girls stood stunned, not understanding what was happening. An angry hostess burst into the room. Ruru asked what brought her here. She looked at her with a fierce look. The woman silently raised her hand and hit the maid hard in the face. The fragile girl fell on all fours from the blow. The hostess asked in a menacing tone how she dared joke in front of the regent. She also reminded her of the rules to follow. Blushing up to her ears, the employee sat awkwardly on her knees. She sincerely began to beg for forgiveness. To her left, the woman heard a stuttering voice. With trembling lips, Leah tried to say that Ruru was not to blame. The lady took a deep breath. With a more confident tone, the girl said that she herself had chosen this outfit. She was the one who did it. Leah continued to defend her maid. She claimed that Ruru tried to stop her. However, the girl insisted on her own, so she eventually gave up. The owner replied that she was fully aware and understood the situation. Times have changed, but there are strict laws to follow. No normal maid will forget this. Leah wanted to ask a question. However, the woman interrupted her, calling her a stupid girl. She asked if she really didn't understand anything. The strict mistress gave her a warning. If the girl causes more trouble in the future, Ruru will be punished in her place. This was said in a scary tone. Having finished the conversation, the woman silently turned around and left the room. Leah remained standing there, confused. A feeling of injustice raged in her soul. She called the owner an old hag. Having come to her senses, the girl rushed to the maid. She started apologizing and saying that it was her fault. She muffledly replied that she was fine. With horror, Leah looked at Ruru's face, swollen from the blow. The girl asked how she could say that everything was okay. The mistress's hands seemed so huge, like weapons. The mistress left the maid and ran for a wet towel. Ruru, beaten, did not have to wait long. When Leah returned, she helped her move to the soft sofa. The girl knelt down and carefully began to wipe the servant's face. She sat motionless, her hands awkwardly clasped together. She said that the lady should not apologize. Ruru noted that she had to give the girl a proper explanation. Still, she was not familiar with the local culture. The blonde asked what exactly she should have explained to her. Lowering her gaze, the maid began to explain the situation. She explained that initially the madam had to undergo training, but due to disturbing events in the palace, it was cancelled. Leah was surprised to hear about the training program. She assumed it was to learn how to survive in a harem. Wanting to get an accurate answer, The girl asked what this program was for. The maid continued in a confident tone. "This," she said, "is a kind of set of rules that all women here are obliged to follow. Included are history lessons, royal etiquette training, and so on. They were also taught several ways to please the king." The lady found the last point frightening and disgusting. Ruru wanted to continue, but Leah stopped her. She asked not to go into details. The girl came to the conclusion that things couldn't get any worse. She felt like she was going to throw up. But when she remembered what happened at the banquet, she didn't have a chance. The lady felt sorry for Ruru. Her strategy was successful. Unable to contain herself, the girl giggled. The maid just looked at her in surprise. A quiet knock was heard in the regent's chambers. It was the Prime Minister. Carrion replied that he had arrived just in time. The man casually threw a neatly folded stack of papers onto the table. He said he looked at them all. Carrion said that with the exception of a few whose identities they knew, everyone else was a suspect. The regent raised his hand and tapped his fingers lightly on the document. He pointed to a specific woman. Among everyone, she seemed the most suspicious. Besides, they only knew her name. Nothing more. They did not know where it came from or which nobleman sent it as a gift. The Prime Minister looked carefully at the pasted photograph of the girl. He remembered this lady. The man pulled the sheet closer to his face, continuing to study the image. In a hushed voice, he noticed that this girl definitely stood out from the rest. The old man asked what Carrion was going to do. If she turns out to be a spy, they will interrogate her and force her to reveal who is behind all this. Or they will simply be expelled from the country. However, if the lady turns out to be that same mercenary... The man paused. He stated that they would execute her. The regent added that this woman had killed his younger brother. That's why they couldn't let her go so easily. He then asked the Prime Minister if he agreed with him. He looked at him and nodded confidently. One could read agreement and submission in his red eyes. The old man said they shouldn't have acted on circumstantial evidence alone. After all, then the situation will only get worse. It will be unpleasant if the prey hides. The ruler listened carefully to his subordinate. After some thought, he decided to conduct meetings with the suspects in person. The Prime Minister could not hide his surprise. Seeing such a reaction, the regent noted that there was nothing to be surprised about. The man decided to remind his subordinate of his own words. More recently, he claimed that this was the harem of His Majesty Carrion. Actually, the ruler had every right to date girls. This way, he could check them all without raising suspicion. Finally, the Prime Minister understood everything. He bowed and declared that he would convey this message to the head of the harem. The man noted that Regent Carrion was still working non-stop. He asked him to take a break, and he agreed. Then the door closed with a quiet creak. The ruler was left alone in the room. He began to look at the image from Leah's documents again. The Prime Minister walked slowly down the corridor. Suddenly, a black silhouette appeared behind him. However, the old man did not even flinch. The mysterious man ordered him to stay away and not take his eyes off him. The man obediently agreed. There was peace and quiet in Leah's room. She became so lost in her thoughts that she began to lose track of time. It was very warm, sunny, and clean here. However, the girl had only one problem. It was that she had nothing to occupy herself with. She didn't like idleness at all. If she hadn't been kidnapped, she would have been busy working as an intern after her trip. Bored to the point of madness, the lady began to scrub the floor with a rag. Naturally, the girl has already been fired. Since she did not go to work and was now far away, Leah could not understand what she had forgotten in this strange country. Suddenly, the doors opened without knocking. A stunned Ruru burst into the room. Breathing heavily, she turned to her mistress. Then the maid saw what the girl was doing. Her facial expression reflected a mixed feeling of surprise, alarm, and bewilderment. Leah gasped awkwardly and blushed. She tried to say that she was cleaning. Ruru, puzzled, dropped to the same level as her mistress. She asked if she was doing a bad job or was simply not suitable for her. The maid began to deny everything. She argued that this was not the case. Leah indignantly stated that she was incredibly bored. There was no internet here. She had no choice but to sit in her room all day. This torture drove the girl crazy. Ruru looked at her mistress knowingly. She thought she should have gone out into the fresh air. The maid stood up abruptly and began to kick the girl out of the room. She said she needed to go for a walk. Leah tried to resist, but to no avail. A second later, she stood in shock in the corridor. Finally, Ruru asked the girl not to do her work anymore. The lady wanted to invite her to divide the affairs. but the doors slammed shut in her face. The airflow brushed Leah's long hair. There was a light breeze blowing outside. The girl walked slowly along the corridor with arches opening onto the street. Despite her concerns, nothing happened after the banquet. It seemed to her that the other ladies had already become friends. Leah snorted in displeasure. She didn't want to drink tea with them. Lost in thought, the girl did not hear a man approaching from behind. The man indignantly asked who she was and how she got here. This area was reserved only for members of the royal family. The lady did not realize that this voice was speaking to her in reality. He seemed damn familiar to her. The man's hand touched the girl's shoulder. He turned to her again and said that he had asked a question. Frightened, Leah instinctively waved away the stranger's hand. She screamed and told him not to touch her. Regent Carrion did not expect such a reaction at all. The surprise was so strong that he lost his balance and approached the edge of the balcony. The man began to fall backwards. He spread his arms out to the sides in an attempt to grab onto something. However, his efforts were unsuccessful. After a moment, the girl realized her mistake. The ruler fell to the ground with a crash and let out a groan. The alarmed birds quickly took off into the air. Then came the sounds of guards stomping. 2 tall armed men ran up to Leah. They pulled out their katanas and blocked her path. The girl tried to make out the faces of the guards. She didn't understand who these people were and where they came from. Suddenly, Leah realized that there was something much more important than these questions. The lady looked back towards the balcony from which the ruler had fallen. There stood a dark-haired man with a katana on his belt. His name was Faris. He turned to Carrion, asking if he was okay. The man lying in the bushes sighed heavily. He barely said that he was still alive. The girl covered her mouth with her hand in shame. This was a huge relief for her. She realized that she had almost committed murder. Regent Carrion remained motionless, lying in place. He expressed himself angrily and said that he could not move at all. Evening was slowly approaching. The light was already on in the lady's room. She sat motionless on the silk sofa in her room. The mistress of the harem stood in front of her. She wanted to discuss several important issues with her. Without allowing the woman to say a word, Leah interrupted her. She started saying that Ruru didn't do anything wrong. It was all an accident. The girl came to the conclusion that the regent was to blame for everything. It was he who suddenly came up from behind and scared her. The hostess was surprised by the mistress's reaction, because she didn't even say anything. She also found it strange that the guards did not prevent Leah from entering the forbidden territory. The woman advised the girl to be more careful in future. She noted that this place is exclusively for the royal family. Leah had no right to visit him without permission. Suddenly, the mistress anxiously grabbed the mistress's hands. She said that from now on she had nothing to worry about. The girl promised that she would not set foot on that territory again. The woman looked at her in bewilderment and pulled away. Leah realized that she had done something wrong. The hostess explained that she came to her for another reason. She was going to personally tell the lady important news. The regent plans to talk to each girl separately. Leah stood there dumbfounded. The woman said it was very important. Therefore, the lady should have made sure that she was well prepared. She was haunted by the thought that each one would be alone with him. She assumed it would be some kind of interrogation. Then Leah realized one thing. There is no way she will be able to avoid the meeting. This realization made her even more nervous. She didn't know what to expect from her conversation with the regent. Finally, the hostess gave a warning that she would keep an eye on her. So the lady should have been more careful. Then the door clanged shut. The girl stood there confusedly, not understanding what to do. Out of desperation, she shouted Ruru's name, hoping for help. Morning of the next day. The bright sunlight gave everything around a special shine. Having carefully collected herself, Leah went to the terrace. The girl leaned against the wall, looking at the other women. According to her maid, some of them had already talked to Carrion. They sat lazily on the sofas, discussing something among themselves. The lady looked at them with curiosity. She wanted to come over and find out how it all went. With disappointment, she thought that it was not worth going to them. It didn't look like any of them would deign to answer her. Suddenly, the girl felt a sharp push in her back. It was a dark-haired woman whom the mistress had noticed more than once. With contempt, she expressed her surprise by asking what Leah was doing there. The brunette added that she was hiding like a rat. The girl looked at her indignantly. It was annoying from day one. When the lady woke up, she accidentally pushed the woman. She immediately seemed rather stern to her. The brunette noted in a condescending tone that number 20 was Leah. When she first heard about the numbers, the girl was surprised. the woman continued sarcastically. She heard that Regent Carrion was injured because of his mistress, so instead of being here, she should have thought about herself. And also be grateful that she wasn't sent to prison. The brunette asked if Leah was really that desperate to get his attention. She looked at her with a frowning face. As she left, the woman insultingly called the lady a pathetic little fool. She stated that 1,000,000 years would not be enough for her to attract the attention of the ruler. These words surprised Leah. She wondered how this woman even dared to speak out like that. The lady hoped that she would not even have to meet with the regent again. Night has come. The stars sparkled brightly in the sky. All the girls had been in their rooms for a long time. The maids could also be with them if they wished. Leah turned to Ruru with concern. She looked at her mistress and politely asked what she wanted. The girl asked about number 20. Her hand twitched awkwardly. The maid asked where she heard it. Leah replied that she was on the terrace. One of the girls called her number 20. The woman sighed heavily. She hoped that the mistress would not find out about this. Ruru began to explain everything. By number 20, that girl meant the room number. This number is in order of how close she is to Regent Carrion. The size and interior of the room also changes depending on the orders. Leah asked what about her room, number 20. The maid hesitated to answer. She sadly said that this was the last room, the most homely of all. The woman tried to calm the lady down and asked her not to be upset. She said it didn't really matter now. Ruru wanted to continue, but Leah interrupted her. She asked to forget about everything and stop this conversation. The girl abruptly covered her head in the blanket. She said she was going to bed. The maid was about to leave the room. The lady with a dissatisfied tone asked her to turn off the light. Ruru quickly complied with the request and left. There was a loud click of the door closing. The room became dark. With her face buried in the pillow, the girl smiled sarcastically. The maid said that this room was the most nondescript. To Leah, however, it looked like a hotel. Suddenly the blonde giggled. She sighed happily with pleasure. The girl still couldn't believe that she was the last. This meant that the regent was not at all interested in her. She had never felt so happy before, being in last place. The regent and the doctor were present in the room. The man turned to the patient. He said there were no serious injuries to his bones or body. The muscles were just very tense. Therefore, a little rest should be enough to recover. Carrion listened to the doctor and said that he could go. Having bowed, the man left. A mysterious guy in a black robe entered the room. The patient seemed to be waiting for him. He stated that the woman tried to kill him. The brunette replied that everything looked like an accident. Resting his elbows on the bed, the regent let out a heavy sigh. Through the pain, he rose and sat down. Behind his disheveled hair, only his lips were visible. The man said that he had to deal with this himself. He looked at the guy with expectant eyes. The ruler ordered him to immediately make an appointment with the girl for tomorrow. The next day came. The girl sat mysteriously at the table. She enjoyed the cool morning and delicious breakfast. I also admired the unusual landscape while drinking coffee. It's hard to even imagine what could be better. Leah thought about it. On the other hand, the fact of abduction was still present. However, the girl's train of thoughts was interrupted by a loud knock on the door. The lady did not even have time to chew her food. A maid entered the room and began to fuss. She brought the board and placed it against the wall. Opposite her, the woman placed a wooden table. Lady Leah silently watched what was happening. Ruru said it was time for a history lesson. The girl frowned sadly. She did not understand the meaning of what was happening and wondered why all this was necessary. The maid noted that they had little time, so she told the lady to sit down quickly. After preparations were completed, the lesson began. The woman began a long story about the country in which they were now. She stressed that it is one of the few that are run by the monarchy. Although the country is small, most of the valuable resources belong to the royal family. In addition, this is a closed state in which society strictly adheres to national traditions. Mid-century saw invasions by Islamic groups. Some traditions remained from them and continued to exist in this country. For example, the same harem. The king was in a deplorable state. The first son, Carrion, was illegitimate. He participated in the role of deputy. The man trusted him, so his word was law. The maid emphasized that any attempts to insult or harm the king and his family will not go unpunished. Leah didn't like this news. She angrily expressed her dissatisfaction in her thoughts. Ruru asked if the lady was listening to her. She raised her hand and stated that she had one question. She asked why there was such a big age difference between the eldest son Carrion and the youngest. The narrator sighed heavily and continued. Not long ago, the eldest prince died due to an accident. Therefore, the second son took his place. The children of the second and third queens were quite old. However, they have less chance of winning the throne. Leah sank. The king had 3 queens. The girl wondered how many children he had. Frowning, she came to the conclusion that the old man was a vile pervert. The lady turned to Ruhr. She noted that she never answered her questions. Leah asked why the maid decided to teach her all this now. Ruru explained that the mistress was worried that Leah was disrespecting traditions. She instructed the woman to prepare the lady for a meeting with the regent. Leah sighed casually. She said it would take forever until it was her turn. The maid smiled. She said that she needed to be ready and go immediately. The deepest surprise was visible in Leah's eyes. She couldn't believe what was said. For a short moment, the girls looked at each other in silence. Ruru turned to the lady warily. She asked if she was planning anything wild. Lady Leah hastened to reassure the maid, assuring her that there was nothing to worry about. She wasn't going to do anything out of the ordinary. A dim light burned in the dark room, barely illuminating the space. Purple stains stood out clearly on the cold concrete floor, creating an ominous atmosphere. They belonged to a beaten man. Bleeding, he was tightly tied to a chair. The tall blonde noted with displeasure that the prisoner had trained well. His long hair was disheveled. There was another man in an expensive suit standing in the corner of the room. He confidently stated that the prisoner was no match for his partner. Then he asked if he had received an answer to his question. The blonde said not really. The prisoner claimed that they were mercenaries in the palace, but he didn't know who exactly. Therefore, the man did not consider this a full answer. He informed his partner that he needed to return to the palace. He noted that the boss ordered to monitor the further course of events. The man also suggested that the nobles would be furious when they learned of the return of his friend. To these words, the blonde said that he screwed up last time. However, now he will not make any more mistakes. The time has come for a personal meeting between Lady Leah and Carrion. The lady was dressed in a rather strange attire. It covered her from head to toe. A short employee met the girl and told her to follow him. Slowly along the corridor, the couple moved towards the ruler's chambers. The man said that the regent was already waiting for her inside. After all, there were huge wooden doors in front of them. The servant said that the lady needed to enter this room. Leah thought she had been treated unfairly. She was sent too suddenly, and she did not understand the reason for this. A rustling sound came from the chambers. The girl tensed. Ruru said it was just a meeting. Nothing bad should happen. Leah let out a muffled breath. She thought she had indigestion. Gathering her strength, the lady entered the room. Translucent yellow curtains hung in front of her. They stretched from the ceiling to the floor. A black silhouette appeared behind the curtains. Leah guessed that it was the regent. Suddenly, he asked if she was a Muslim. Hesitatingly, the girl replied that no. The man asked what she was wearing at the time. The lady nervously clenched her hands into fists. Her face expressed concern. The lady replied that she was wearing a hanbok. This is the traditional dress in her home country. The situation that arose was very stressful for Leah. Carrion, unable to resist, let out a quiet laugh. He asked what country the girl was from. The question posed infuriated the lady. The ruler himself kidnapped her. She didn't understand why he was asking this. She also really wanted her mobile phone back. Leah asked if the man didn't know where she was from. In response, he ordered her to come closer. The regent asked what the girl was counting on. It seemed to him that she was taking this situation too lightly. Leah began to deny and claim that everything was completely wrong. Suddenly, the man pulled the curtain aside. The lady blushed in surprise. In front of the girl, showing a proud posture, sat Regent Carrion. He was dressed in wide blue trousers and an open robe. His chest was wrapped in bandages. Leah confusedly asked why the man was dressed like that. He waved his hand and replied that it was because of her. The lady did not understand why he said that. She never asked him to undress in front of her. Carrion leaned smugly on the back of the sofa. He said that thanks to the lady, he almost died in the corridor. Fortunately, his bones remained intact. However, he could not dress normally due to the aching pain that covered his entire body. Leah stammered that it was an accident. She claimed that the man then appeared out of nowhere and really scared her. The regent ignored these words. He looked into the mistress's eyes without taking his eyes off. Suddenly, the man ordered the girl to take off her own robe. She frowned, not understanding what he was talking about. Carrion slowly rose to his feet and walked towards the frightened mistress. He repeated his words threateningly. demanding that these rags be removed immediately. Leah realized that her feelings of indigestion were justified. She felt very bad. The silhouette of the approaching man began to blur. Suddenly, the girl collapsed to the floor with a crash, losing consciousness. Post-traumatic stress disorder, abbreviated as PTSD. This is exactly the diagnosis the doctor gave Leah. He prescribed her to take medication and also to distance all negativity from herself. There were two men in the room. Sitting in the opposite corner from the sleeping mistress, they were talking intently about something. Ferris turned to Carrion. He asked what he was doing with the girl. The regent was clearly outraged by the question asked. The ruler asked the gentleman what he meant. He didn't understand who they took him for. Deciding to answer the question, Carrion explained that he had only asked Leah to take off these strange clothes. The regent's face showed great excitement. He asked the guy if he was sure that the lady was not pretending. It seemed to him that it was impossible to switch off so suddenly. The man calmly stated no. The girl's pulse was too slow and the ends of her arms and legs were cold. Even an actor could not perform such a production. The regent put his hand to his head in annoyance, feeling a pulsation in his temple. This situation irritated him to no end. He couldn't even ask anything. But of all the women, she was the strangest. Fueled by a thirst for curiosity, Carrion suggested calling a doctor. Ferris shook his head and said that it was not worth it. It was just a fainting spell. He stated that the ruler was not able to deliver the mistress to the harem. The man intended to offer his help, but he was interrupted. In an angry tone, he was told not to touch the girl. The regent said that he would deal with her himself. Ferris just stared blankly. Carrion continued dryly. The gentleman previously claimed that it was not dangerous. Therefore, the man wanted to make sure that Leah would wake up. He has a lot of questions, and it won't be difficult for him to wait a little. After carefully listening to the interlocutor, the guy asked if he could go. The regent nodded approvingly without saying a word. The huge doors clicked quietly as they closed. Ferris cast a puzzled glance after him and walked away. In the room, the regent was left alone with the sleeping girl. He wandered in his thoughts, continuing to stand motionless. After some time, the man came to his senses. He cast an interested glance towards Leah. The lady lay peacefully on the bed, deep in sleep. She was on her back and her arms were wrapped around her slender stomach. Carrion realized that he had previously been unable to see the girl because of these strange clothes. He slowly looked over every millimeter and curve of her body. The man thought it was funny. He looked at the face of a woman who might have been a mercenary. His gaze settled on her plump lips. Thick black eyebrows frowned in alarm, and Carrion's breathing stopped for a moment. Carefully leaning on the soft bed, he sat down on it. Slouching slightly, the man was lost in his own thoughts. He wondered how long he would have to wait. Just recently, the gentleman assured him that the girl was about to wake up. Carrion made a promise to himself. He will certainly find out where she comes from and who is behind all this. And he will also find out the true reason why Leah tried to kill him. The regent collapsed onto the bed with his entire body. The constant aching pain did not give him peace, so he decided to lie down for a minute. Closing his sleepy eyes, the man continued to mutter something under his breath. He promised to rest just a little and then fell asleep. Under the blanket of night, the city was shrouded in darkness. Leah had a dream. It again contained her mother's hated boyfriend. This was not the first time she had seen this nightmare. The girl was reliving a moment that she wanted to forget with all her heart forever. Returning from school, she saw a half-naked man at home. Smiling, he turned to her and said that they would definitely find a common language. He then began to open his arms and grabbed her shoulders, trying to pull her towards him. Leah began to struggle and scream in protest. The man asked why she was so tense, urging her not to be afraid and to relax. He claimed that for him she was like his own daughter. Being half-conscious, the girl maliciously called him a brat. Then her eyes slowly began to open. Morning has come. The light spread through the quiet streets of the city and awakened him to a new day. People gradually began to bustle about, filling the streets with noise. Waking up, Leah felt a rather unpleasant aftertaste. She dreamed about this nightmare again. This fact irritated her terribly. In front of her, the lady noticed long orange curtains. She was in shock for a moment. The girl wondered where she was. Leah looked around warily. To her left, she noticed a sleeping brunette. It was Regent Carrion. His hair was disheveled in his sleep, partially covering his face. The lady was frightened by the fact that she found herself in the same bed with a stranger. Suddenly, she jumped up, moving away. Then Leah became fully aware of who was lying next to her. The girl was overcome with horror and screamed with all her might. A piercing scream echoed throughout the castle, reflecting her fear. Hearing the screech, the guards turned towards the ruler's chambers. They tensed in anticipation of a possible threat. Next to them stood another man, the same brunette with a short haircut. In a calm tone, Fares told the guards to calm down. There was nothing to worry about here. Carrion also woke up involuntarily. Exhaling heavily, he asked who was making noise so early. His wounds still hurt, reminding him of what had happened. Looking around, the man noticed a frightened girl. She sat hugging her knees and also looked at him carefully. The regent's breath caught. He was unable to utter a word. A bright blush appeared on the mistress's face and shock was reflected in her eyes. It was an early morning. There were two people in the room. The prime minister and the hostess were talking, figuring out something important. The man turned to the woman with a demanding expression, carefully placing the saucer and cup on the table. Looking into her eyes, he asked if he had a chance. The harem manager stated that due to what happened earlier, she did not see such a possibility. Strange rumors were circulating around the palace, and the prime minister knew about it. They knew that everyone had their suspicions. However, none of the palace residents were willing to express personal opinions. The old man in the white robe sighed heavily. He was really aware of this gossip. The man said that the killer was one thing, but rumors would not lead to anything good. Then the prime minister raised his head sharply. He asked how the new girl was doing. It seemed to him that the regent did not take his eyes off her. The woman was silent for a minute. After some time, she clarified whether he was talking about number 20. She then added that she doubted the man's statement. At the same moment, a couple was in the chambers of Regent Carrion. They were stunned by what was happening and looked at each other in bewilderment. The man began to remember that this was the same girl who came yesterday. He found it strange how distant she acted. Carrion stood up and slowly began to approach his mistress. He asked her not to misunderstand him. The man wanted to continue, but he was interrupted by the sudden cry of the girl. Frightened, Leah screamed and demanded that the ruler not touch her. Then she grabbed the hem of her dress and rushed to the doors. The regent tried to stop the lady, but all his attempts were in vain. She didn't even want to listen to him. The man stood there, confused and disappointed. He had so many questions for the girl, but now he didn't know how to ask them. Leah ran out of the room and closed the doors with a bang. She leaned her back against them, trying to catch her breath. The lady did not understand what exactly frightened her and why she did this. Then the girl looked up. The corridor was filled with strangers who looked at her suspiciously. Leah began to stutter, trying to say something in her own defense. She managed to squeeze out that nothing had happened. In response, these people only turned around, completely ignoring her. The girl continued to scream and swear that nothing had happened. Leah continued to move quickly along the corridors. She then decided to stop and take a break to catch her breath. The lady still could not forget about what had happened. She knew she had definitely passed out. This hasn't happened to her for a long time. The girl sighed heavily with annoyance. She knew that the master would misunderstand her again. This fact angered her, and she expressed herself obscenely out loud. Suddenly, Leah noticed a man lying by a column. As she got closer to him, she realized that he had lost consciousness. The lady was overcome with a feeling of anxiety. She didn't know what to do or how to call an ambulance here. The excited girl ran up to the unconscious body. She gently shook the blonde's shoulders and asked if he was okay. Leah then grabbed the guy tighter and told him to wake up. With irritation, she noticed that he reeked of alcohol. Waking up, the blonde hummed a long time. He looked at the girl and asked what kind of angel woke him from sleep. Leah cast a suspicious glance. She pushed the guy's body away and it hit the ground with a loud crash. The lady realized that he was completely fine. The man sat cross-legged and thought about how annoying it was. As it turned out, the girl coped much better than he expected. Behind him, the blonde heard a familiar voice. This was the mistress of the harem. She addressed him respectfully as Lord Caesar. The woman asked what the man was doing here and in such a state. He smiled back and noted that they had not seen each other for a long time. Caesar explained that he simply drank too much with his friends the night before. He added that the hostess should know what these aristocrats are capable of. She just looked at him with contempt. There were two men in the ruler's office. Despite his wounds, Regent Carrion was already dressed in his casual clothes. He turned to Fares. The ruler asked whether it was not a man's duty to protect him. Frowning, he questioned why he had left him alone with this girl last night. Faraz replied that the lady posed no danger. Otherwise, he wouldn't have left Carrion alone with her. The regent concluded that the man trusted Leah. He gave him a disapproving look and asked what would happen if he was wrong. Faraz stated that the main targets are the king and the first prince. Accordingly, the girl would not take risks. Carrion suggested that he need not worry since he was the king's illegitimate child. In a cold-blooded tone, the man said that if Leah turned out to be a murderer, he would get rid of her. His gaze was persistent and penetrating, reflecting the determination and seriousness of his intentions. Regent Carrion nodded and stated that he needed to check a few things before doing so. He ordered Faraz to go with him to the harem. The rumor spread like wildfire. Leah had a hard time believing one thing. Apparently, she was the only one who spent the whole night in Carrion's room. Strange gossip had been circulating around the palace for a long time, because of his indifference to the women of the harem. This raised various questions and guesses among many. The girl thought about the possible preferences of the king's eldest son. However, she immediately discarded such thoughts. His sexual orientation should not concern her. It seemed to Leah that there was no point in this. She didn't understand why she was kidnapped. The lady then came to the conclusion that this was not a topic to think about at the moment. The blonde began to wonder whether it was normal that she so suddenly ran away from the regent's chambers. Although she was not familiar with the culture of this country, the king did exist here. It seemed to the girl that the ruler considered her crazy. Then behind her, Leah heard Ruru's voice. With a sincere smile on her face, she said that she was proud of her mistress. The maid added that even the manager told her to take special care of Leah. However, these words only angered her. The girl rebelled and started screaming that nothing happened between them that night. Ruru shuddered in surprise, and the hair on her arms stood on end. In a calm tone, the maid asked why the lady was so angry. Leah tried to find the right words. However, her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. A man's voice came from the corridor. He confidently announced the arrival of Regent Carrion. Ruru turned around and froze in surprise. The girl was overcome with the same amazement. She couldn't believe that the man had come here on his own. The maid turned back to Leah. She wanted to report that the regent had arrived, but the lady was no longer there. Her sudden disappearance left the woman bewildered. The ruler entered the room, accompanied by Faraz. All they saw was a confused Ruru standing in the center of the room with a confused expression on her face. The man looked at the maid. He noticed that the lady was not there now. Carrion's partner stared thoughtfully out the window. The woman bowed guiltily, apologizing. She stated that the girl was definitely here a few minutes ago. The regent asked if this room belonged to Leah, and whether the lady had just been here. Ruru answered in the affirmative. Carrion couldn't figure out where she was going. He looked thoughtfully into space, thinking about possible options for retreat. At this time, the missing girl was standing behind a column that separated the arched windows. Her delicate feet were bare, and her long dress fluttered carelessly in the wind. Leah couldn't understand what Carrion was doing. She didn't think he would ever come to her. With annoyance, the lady noted that the morning was too early for her. Suddenly, the girl lost her balance and staggered. Unable to hold on, she began to fall from a small ledge. Leah was overcome with desperate thoughts. Fear and helplessness made her heart beat faster. She couldn't believe that she could die right now, in this unfamiliar place. The lady could not hold back her scream. Then an unfamiliar hand grabbed her under her right shoulder, and she felt an unpleasant tension in this place. It turned out to be Faraz. He carefully lifted Leah and placed her on the floor. Stuttering, the girl sincerely thanked the man. She could have died if it weren't for him. Her face blushed awkwardly. Faraz answered dryly that he was only fulfilling his duty to his master. Then he asked the lady to be more careful in future. Turning around, the man walked away. The girl was very surprised by his behavior. She expected that he would certainly hand her over to Carrion. After this incident, the ruler came to Leah twice. Concerned, Ruru turned to the lady. She said she ran away from him again. The maid was trying to pull her thick hair into a ponytail. She asked why the girl did this for the umpteenth time. Leah stated that it was not difficult to tell. She asked what Ruru wanted to achieve by asking such questions. The woman replied that she could not understand why the lady was avoiding the ruler. She suggested that perhaps Leah hated him. She confirmed this with a confident nod. Ruru said that Carrion did not give any chance to the other ladies. They tried to get his attention, but to no avail. That's why everyone is so excited right now. Some high-born noblewomen joined the harem for the sake of their families. Now that they have been neglected, They feel humiliated. Leah asked why they came here of their own free will. The maid answered without hesitation. The women did this to win the king's favor. Ruru continued. Nobles sent their daughters and nieces as gifts to the monarch to gain more power. These words opened the lady's eyes. She used to think that they were all kidnapped too. Suddenly the front doors opened, interrupting the maid. A crowd of women burst into the room. One of them began to ridicule the room with contempt, saying that it was the size of her closet. They scared the lady. For a second she thought it was Regent Carrion again. However, these turned out to be the same noblewomen that Ruru was talking about. Meanwhile, an important meeting was taking place in the main hall. Many men sat at a long table, actively and vigorously discussing current issues with tasks. At the head of the table was Regent Carrion. He thoughtfully tapped his fingers on the surface, ignoring all conversations. The man couldn't stop thinking about Leah. It seemed to him that she was clearly avoiding him. Her eyes were filled with fear, like those of a defenseless animal being pursued by a hunter. Carrion couldn't even imagine that the girl was a killer. It was too much for her. The regent then suggested that perhaps he was mistaken. Suddenly, his deep thoughts were interrupted by the prime minister. He cleared his throat a little to get the ruler's attention. The old man said that everyone present was waiting for his approval. The regent quickly scanned the text. Angrily, he threw a stack of papers on the table and began screaming. He asked if everyone was seriously calling these budget proposals. Carrion has never seen any country organize its budget this way. Instead of thinking about the good of the country and people, they were all worried only about their personal well-being. Everyone present lowered their heads in shame. The ruler asked if they had really done this until now. Then a stack of papers scattered throughout the room. The man was amazed that this country had not yet turned into ruins. He ordered everyone to submit proper amendments to the budget. The regent spoke in a threatening tone, warning that if the situation did not change, no one would receive a penny this year. Carrion's speech was interrupted by the sudden voice of the envoy. After apologizing, he reported a small problem. The two women grappled furiously, grabbing each other's hair. Their faces were distorted with anger and their eyes sparkled with determination. The stunned girls and maids all looked at this with open mouths. There was a tense silence in the air, broken only by the sounds of fighting. The mistress growled fiercely that the woman had chosen the wrong opponent. She was definitely the leader in this fight. The brunette grabbed her opponent's hands and tried to pull them away from her head. She suddenly squealed, worried about her own hair. The woman screamed, demanding that she put her down, and called her a barbarian. Leah looked sternly at her rival and pointed out that it all started with her. The lady remembered an old story. There was a time when she thought she was the problem. This thought depressed her very much. Soon the girl got tired of being blamed for everything. Leah tried repeatedly to explain everything. However, people did not believe her and thought that she was just making excuses. Later, the woman realized that she was not responsible for the emotions and actions of other people. Once a situation happened, after which a classmate began to express a negative attitude towards her. The red-haired girl told everyone that Leah was the daughter of her mistress. This, in her opinion, explained the mistress's behavior. That day, the girl got into a fight with this hooligan and won. This is what high school girls in Korea can be like. From then on, Leah considered her a stubborn girl. She really thought she would lose all her hair that day. Suddenly, the mistress of the harem burst into the room. She asked what the girls were doing here and ordered them to stop immediately. The lady froze, looking carefully at the manager. Then she noticed a familiar face in the aisle and her eyes widened in amazement. Regent Carrion stood near the door. She was haunted by the question of why he had chosen this particular moment to be here. The girl instantly let go of the brunette's long hair. She fell and began to scream loudly. The woman said that Leah attacked her first and therefore deserves punishment. Not paying attention to the lady's words, the mistress slowly turned to the mistress. Her face showed restrained curiosity as she calmly asked for an explanation of what really happened. The girl froze for a second, carefully considering her words. She knew that if she made a mistake, Ruru would be in trouble again. Taking a deep breath, Leah stated that the brunette struck first. Accordingly, she simply responded with a mutual attack. The woman asked what this could mean. Suddenly, the dialogue was interrupted by the regent. He informed the hostess that he wished to speak with the lady alone. The girl was shocked by this statement. She couldn't accept the fact that she would have to talk to Carrion again. The harem manager bowed respectfully. She then quickly ordered everyone present to go to their rooms. Two women, firmly supporting the hated brunette by the hands, headed towards the exit. She continued to whine, wiping her snot. Leah looked at the retreating crowd with pleading eyes, urging them to stay. The corners of her lips looked down. Then the door closed with a soft click. The girl turned to face the ruler. Fairs was still standing next to him. This surprised her, but she quickly remembered that the man was the regent's guard. Carrion silently continued to peer at his mistress. She felt awkward standing in front of him, since she had not had time to change her clothes. Leah felt naked in that pink nightgown. She couldn't understand why the sight of this man always made it difficult for her to breathe. This time was no exception. When the man suddenly began to speak, the lady shuddered. Her tender cheeks flushed with a bright blush. Carrion was glad that he finally had the opportunity to talk to Leah in person. Looking into her eyes, he asked why the girl was avoiding him all the time. The lady was surprised. The regent asked her about it so directly. She stated that it was a misunderstanding and that she did not avoid him. They just didn't intersect. The ruler decided to immediately move on to the topic of conversation. He said that as long as the girl did not lose consciousness like last time, she could answer all his questions. Carrion asked where the blonde was from and who sent her here. Without hiding her emotions, Leah frowned angrily. She stated that she did not understand the essence of the question, since the regent himself kidnapped her. The men's faces showed deep surprise. The ruler asked why he should kidnap the lady. She replied that it was she who should ask such questions. The regent sincerely did not understand what the girl was talking about. He began to wonder what she was up to this time. The man then replied that he did not believe her. Carrion reported that they were in a closed country. However, such serious crimes are unacceptable here. Leah replied that he should have asked the head of the harem about this. She also added that, in her opinion, this country is at least 100 years behind in development. The girl doubted that there were any proper laws here at all. She considered it completely uncivilized. Besides, she also didn't like the clothes that were here. Carrion said that he completely agreed with the lady. However, it was disrespectful to look down on the culture of a foreign country. He did not give her permission to insult his state. Leah couldn't stand it and started screaming. She stated that if she had not been kidnapped, she would have had nothing to do with this country. Besides, if the regent was so suspicious of her, he should have simply let her go. The lady would be happy to leave here. The couple looked at each other silently for several seconds. Breaking the pause, Carrion said that he could not allow this. After these words, the conversation was over and the man left the room. The ruler walked slowly along the corridor, thinking. For a moment, he felt the urge to apologize to Leah. His belief that she was a criminal may have been proven wrong. The regent addressed Ferris, who was walking behind him. He ordered the head of the harem to be called to his office. Ferris asked if Carrion believed in the mistress's words. The man turned slightly and firmly answered that no. Kidnapping was abolished during his grandfather's lifetime. The guard asked why the ruler called the hostess. He suggested that the regent was up to something. Carrion nodded in approval. Smiling mysteriously, he said that the woman would not like this news. Leah remembered the words of the regent. He argued that under no circumstances could he allow her to be released. However, the girl knew from the very beginning that the ruler would not believe her. It seemed that he took her for a maid. This fact caused her deep dissatisfaction. The mistress noticed how the maid behind her began to carefully fold some things. At this time, the mistress of the harem entered the room and asked Ruru to hurry. She bowed obediently. Leah asked what they were doing. To be clear, the woman ordered to simply pack the clothes, nothing more. The maid bowed again. The girl realized that she was simply being ignored. Raising her voice significantly, she asked again what the women were doing. The manager replied that she had been ordered to move the lady to another room. Leah's face showed shock. She raised her eyebrows indignantly and asked why they did this without her consent. The woman looked at the girl contemptuously. She didn't like her from the very beginning, so there was no point in counting on consent. The hostess also could not understand how Leah dared to lie to Regent Carrion about the abduction. She then said savagely that the lady should not have asked such questions. The woman asked if she really didn't understand her situation. The regent has the right to do whatever he wants, since his word is law. Leah felt terribly embarrassed. Plucking up courage, she asked where she was being transferred. It seemed to the girl that the manager was taking revenge on her for what happened the last time. She wondered if the new room would be worse, although she wasn't entirely against it. Then the woman said that the lady would move to room number 0. Leah furrowed her eyebrows in disbelief, shocked by what she heard. She asked the hostess to repeat it because she didn't hear her. The manager repeated more clearly which apartment the lady was moving into. She added that, judging by the number, this was the room closest to the regent. The girl's face turned pale. Her heart beat faster. Her limbs were seized with coldness and an unpleasant tingling sensation. Then a cry spread through the palace that Leah did not want to move to a new room. The lady was overcome with inconsolable grief. She grabbed the edge of the sofa and screamed that she liked it here too. The alarmed maid tried diligently to calm her down and bring her to her senses. After some time, Ruru abandoned this idea. She said tantrums are useless. Even if Leah didn't want it, she couldn't refuse. The manager couldn't listen to this whining anymore. Grabbing the girl by the jacket, she rudely declared that she was nothing but trouble. It gradually began to get dark. Twilight gently wrapped itself around everything, like dark velvet absorbing the last rays of the sun. A man stood still in the corridor. He was talking quietly with a stranger who had disappeared behind a marble column. An unexpected situation has arisen. The man warned that changes in plans are possible. Then he asked his interlocutor about the woman. The stranger said that, strangely enough, no one knew anything. He asked his companion about their next steps. He replied that they did not yet have the full picture. Therefore, they should have waited a little and then carried out the plan. The interlocutor said that he understood everything. The ruler was in a room where warm light burned in some corners. He sat in black glasses at the table, immersed in the analysis of some documents. His long hair was tied into a ponytail. The front strands came out a little and fell onto the forehead. Stacks of papers crowded around the man like a bastion. Ferris entered the room. He reported with disappointment that the regent had missed dinner again. The man asked if he should be brought here. Carrion firmly answered no. Taking off his glasses, he closed the folder he was working on and announced that he was finishing. With annoyance, the ruler said that he would not be able to complete all the work even if he did not sleep for several nights. He claimed that the country was in complete disarray and did not know where to start. Ferris, looking from under his brows, said that the regent should not have put so much pressure on himself. Otherwise, he will go to jail before he begins to reform this country. Carrion was silent for a minute. He then asked if the guard had followed his order. He replied that there were some minor problems, but they managed to get the job done. Seeing the ruler's raised eyebrows, he added that the girl categorically refused to change the room. The ruler smiled lightly and stood up from the table. He found the woman's behavior funny. Suddenly, Ferez turned dispassionately to the regent. He asked why he decided to move the lady. His expression was still unwavering. The man replied that she lied to him about being kidnapped. Accordingly, he assumed that the girl was hiding something. In addition, room number 0 was free. Carrion added that friends need to be close, and enemies even closer. Fairs said nothing. He didn't think the ruler fully understood the significance of this room. However, this was not so important. The night was already deep. The stars in the sky shone especially brightly. Their light shimmered, decorating the dark canvas of the sky, creating a bewitching and calm atmosphere. As soon as the girls entered Leah's new chambers, Ruru gasped. She had worked as a maid since childhood, but this was the first time she had seen this room. Her face showed amazement and delight. The room was furnished to the late queen's taste. Since the previous first prince was lonely, no one had lived here for a long time. The maid could continue the story, but Leah interrupted her. She asked her to stop walking back and forth. Breathing heavily, the girl covered her mouth with her hands. She didn't feel well. Ruru quickly ran up to the lady and offered to call a doctor. She just waved it off. She thought she would feel better if she just rested. All she needed was a prescription. However, they clearly didn't have that here. The maid looked at Leah disapprovingly. Taking a short pause, she wished her a good night's sleep. Finally, the woman decided to clarify whether the girl needed anything else. After a long yawn, the lady waved her hand and said that she could go. She really wanted to sleep. Before leaving, the maid turned to Leah again. She thanked her for the girl standing up for her. No one had ever done this for Ruru before. Without allowing the lady to finish, the woman closed the doors. She stood there for another minute, thinking about what had just happened. Leah realized that she did this because she too had wanted someone to stand up for her in the past. This realization left her thoughtful for some time. Looking around the luxurious bed, the girl involuntarily let out an awkward laugh. She tried to calm down, breathing deeply. However, strong excitement did not leave her body. The mistress took off her orange skirt and it smoothly touched the floor. She wondered why there had been no one in the room for a long time. Leah felt a slight sense of fear. Then a rustling sound came from the corner of the room and goosebumps ran across her skin. The girl thought that she just heard a rustling sound. Suddenly there were quick footsteps behind her again. Her face turned pale with fear and her body froze, unable to move. Leah definitely heard something. Then the dark silhouette flashed by again, moving with a fast and sharp sound. The frightened lady asked who it was. She assumed that the stranger was Ruru, but he only remained silent. There was dead silence in the room. At that moment, the girl remembered the words of her maid. She said that the room was furnished to the taste of the late queen. In addition, the room was not occupied by anyone for a long time. Leah began to have strange and disturbing thoughts. For a moment, she suggested that the room might still be haunted by the ghost of the late queen. This fear pierced the girl to the bones. The lady came to the conclusion that the regent forced her to move here in order to sacrifice her for purification. Suddenly, near the arched door, the girl noticed part of a leg. It was definitely a living person. Quickly gathering her resolve, Leah ran to that place. She was sure that someone was there since ghosts could not have legs. Grabbing the edge of the wall, the lady leaned out and asked who was there. She expected to see anything, but definitely not this. The girl's eyes opened wide in surprise. Around the corner, a long corridor opened up in front of her. It was a secret passage, illuminated by bright lanterns. Its walls had an arched shape, creating the impression of an ancient underground corridor. Leah remembered who had previously lived in this room and where it was located. Then the girl realized that this was a place where love affairs took place. In the end, she decided to go deeper. The lady would not be able to sleep, suspecting that there was someone in the room. No one knew what could have happened to her while she was sleeping. Leah slowly moved further and further. To be sure, she slid along the walls with one hand and clenched the other into a fist, preparing for defense. The lady was sure that a minute ago someone was hiding there. The passage was shorter than she thought. At the end, there was only one wooden door. The girl wondered where she was leading. The regent was in his chambers and had just taken a hot bath. A white towel was wrapped around her hips. The man let out a long sigh. He was completely exhausted after a hard day's work. Carrion guessed that Ferris was right. Perhaps he's been putting too much pressure on himself lately. Suddenly, the ruler heard the creak of a door opening. To his surprise, he saw Leah in the aisle. She was dressed in a snow-white nightgown. Raising her gaze, the girl began to look around the room. Without noticing the man, she heard a rude voice asking what she forgot here. After that, Leah saw Carrion naked. Looking from her feet to her head, she fell into the deepest horror. The man turned to the lady again. Without letting him finish, she apologized and quickly left the room. The regent had mixed feelings. He shouted after her to wait, but she had no intention of stopping and continued running. The girl rushed along the corridor with all her might, afraid to open her eyes. She repeated to herself out loud that she saw nothing. Leah didn't understand why that door led her to his room, and she didn't understand why he was naked. Behind her, she heard a scream. The man told her to stop immediately. Turning around, the lady saw that he was already approaching her. The girl began to feel unwell. Her vision began to grow dark, and her ears were filled with the thunder of approaching footsteps. Carrion quickly realized that Leah was falling. He made a quick jerk and gently grabbed her by the back. With annoyance, the man noted that she had lost consciousness again. He didn't understand why the woman did this every time she saw him. The regent was irritated by this situation. Holding her shoulder, he told her to wake up, but to no avail. Carrion couldn't believe she fainted again. The ruler tried to remember Ferris's instructions. He told me to check my pulse, arms, and legs. Then the man seemed to stop thinking. He tirelessly explored every corner of her body, studying every millimeter of plump lips with special attention. Carrion's free hand involuntarily reached out to the girl. She shuddered, and the regent seemed to wake up. He couldn't do what his father expected of him. The man raised his head and looked around. He wondered which way he should go. Morning has come. The bright sun flooded the room with its light, penetrating through the windows. Its rays played on the walls, creating a warm and cozy atmosphere. Leah was awakened by an unpleasant noise. Someone was continuously turning the pages, creating an endless rustle of paper. Still half asleep, the girl turned to Ruru. Her voice sounded sleepy as she asked what time it was. However, the mistress's question was answered not by her maid, but by an extremely familiar voice. The man said that she would be a little late today. Leah's drowsiness immediately dissipated. The lady suddenly jumped out of bed. covering herself with a powder-colored blanket. Her face showed deep surprise. The peaceful ruler sat in front of her. He carefully compared the two documents, not paying attention to the girl. Leah hugged the blanket even tighter to herself, her eyes full of surprise and anxiety. Stuttering with excitement, she asked what the man had forgotten there. Carrion asked in a calm voice if the lady had forgotten about what happened last night. He added reproachfully that it seemed like it had become her habit to pass out and wake up before his eyes. Not understanding what the regent was talking about, the girl apologized. Then the memories of the secret passage she discovered yesterday began to return to her. Fully aware of what she had then seen, Leah felt the color spread across her face. She stuttered even more, trying to explain what happened. The ruler continued to carefully study the documents without once looking at his lady. He asked if she was going to pass out again. Leah was terribly outraged by the question asked, because she could not control this condition. The girl explained that the loss of consciousness was caused by the disease. Carrion asked if the medicine would help her. The lady quoted the doctor's words, "Eliminate the cause of stress." She noted that she would only be okay if she stopped seeing the regent. The man looked at Leah for the first time and stated that he did not agree with this. She was surprised by this answer, and she asked why this was so. Ignoring his lady's question, Carrion suddenly remembered an important point. He decided that they needed to discuss some issues to avoid possible misunderstandings. With a gentle tap of the stack of papers on the table, straightening them out, he asked Leah to sit down. She obediently complied with his request. Carrion asked if the lady had entered his chambers last night with the intention of killing him. This question shocked her. She didn't understand what the man was talking about. The girl said that the regent was deeply mistaken. She explained that she was simply following strange noises in her chambers. At first, Leah thought it was a ghost. However, she later became convinced that there was definitely a person in her room. The ruler asked if she had seen his face. The lady replied that no, because the room was too dark. The man looked down. He said that the secret passage ended at a dead end where his bedroom was located. Leah continued to insist that she was telling the truth. She begged Carrion to believe her, because she really saw a person there. Then the girl looked at him with a questioning look, full of bewilderment. She asked why she needed to kill him, considering that she was the victim of a kidnapping. The regent offered to clarify the situation. He confidently stated that he did not kidnap her. The lady thought for a moment, perhaps it really wasn't his doing. Carrion added that he also conducted his own investigation. He asked the owner questions about the kidnapping, but she categorically denied everything. She claimed that nothing like this had ever happened. Unable to bear it, Leah asked if the man had heard of the criminal confessing to his own crimes. Naturally, they denied and said that they knew nothing. Leah didn't like the man's contemptuous look. Confused, she decided to ask why he was looking at her like that. Carrion sighed heavily. He asked the girl to explain how she was kidnapped. His words were quiet and decisive. After that, she began to briefly outline her story. The lady said that on the day of the abduction, she wanted to use the restroom at the airport. After that, she didn't remember anything. The regent began to look with even greater suspicion. He sarcastically asked if Leah would believe these words if she were in his place. The girl just looked at the man discouraged. She didn't know what to do, because she really didn't remember anything. Pushing back his chair, Carrion slowly rose from his seat. He said that it was time for him to go, as he had an important meeting soon. A little later, they will be able to continue the conversation. Looking at the floor, Leah asked the regent to wait as she had a question. She asked why he placed her next to his chambers if he believed that she was a murderer. The ruler looked mysteriously at the lady. As he walked towards the exit, he said that that old room was too far away for him to visit. The girl silently noted that in this case the regent might not come at all. Then the man turned around again, remembering something. He wanted to make one more thing clear. Carrion decided to find out if Leah knew what a harem was. She replied that of course she knew. She wondered what he was trying to say by this. The regent quickly continued his thought with a smirk. He said that in this case the girl should understand that she is one of the women in his harem. Leah's eyes suddenly opened wide in surprise and irritation. The ruler's words deeply offended her, causing a storm of indignation in her. Coming out of his mistress's chambers, Carrion carefully closed the doors behind him. Ferris stood opposite him. His gaze was as calm and penetrating as always. The regent asked if he had heard everything. His guard responded positively. Having heard the desired answer, the man asked what he thought about Leah's words. Ferris stated that it is almost impossible to get into the secret corridor without passing the guards. They adamantly defended the palace and harem for a long time. Accordingly, if her words are true, then the Prime Minister was right. Carrion frowned thoughtfully. It became very clear to him that the killer was hiding in the harem. Looking up, the guard noted that this time his target might not be the ruler. The men's faces suddenly became wary and very serious. Ferris suggested that the lady could have made up this story in order to avoid suspicion. His interlocutor nodded in agreement. The guard then asked if Carrion had checked the girl for weapons. He replied that he thoroughly searched her while she was unconscious, including underwear. Ferris smiled awkwardly, eyes wide. The regent cleared his throat, apologizing, and said that the girl had nothing on her. After this, the ruler looked carefully at his guard. He ordered him to conduct a secret investigation and handle the kidnapping. The man bowed slightly and said that he understood everything. Looking down, Carrion added that security also needed to be strengthened. Leah continued to sit sadly in her own room. She thought deeply about the words the regent had spoken earlier. The girl was sitting on the edge of the bed. Some things really didn't add up. She began to believe that the ruler had not kidnapped her. Everyone knew and said that the harem did not arouse much interest in Carrion. Therefore, he had no motive for committing such an act. The lady was nevertheless affected by the regent's suspicions that she could be a murderer. Of course, she would like to kill him for many reasons. However, such a statement upset her. With every hour spent within 4 walls, Leah's mood worsened. The regent assured that he would return after the meeting. The girl was wondering how much longer she had to wait. To sum up her thoughts, one thought came to the lady. Did the man really think that she joined the harem on purpose because she was ordered to kill him? Leah still didn't understand why he suspected her. Was she really acting shady? The girl rejected such thoughts, deciding that she was mistaken. Absorbed in thought, the lady decided to go out and unwind. Slowly getting to her feet, she headed towards the exit. However, a huge surprise awaited her behind the door. Right near the entrance stood a huge bald man in a red t-shirt with black stripes. What she saw made Leah freeze in place. Her eyes opened wide and her mouth dropped open in amazement. Her eyebrows shot up and she felt a cold run through her arms. The girl asked who he was. The man answered dryly that he was a guard. With a hushed voice, she delicately asked him to move away. Frowning slightly, the guard asked the lady to go back inside. He reported that Regent Carrion told her to wait in the room until he himself returned. Cold sweat ran down Leah's face. Hearing the man, she obediently returned to her chambers and closed the doors with a creak. The girl could not believe that the ruler had sent her a guard. The lady was very indignant. She didn't like the fact that the regent treated her like a criminal. Leah then suggested that he had been given the idea that she was a killer. At that very moment, the girl decided that she should talk to Carrion. The girl wondered what would happen if he still didn't believe her. It was enough that she was kidnapped. Leah assumed that now she could be sent to prison without any hesitation. All this time, the lady did not even suspect that Ferris was watching her. He behaved very secretly and cautiously. The man realized that the young lady's monologue was over. After that, he headed towards the secret passage in order to explore it. Ferris squatted down, carefully studying the surface. He noted that there were obvious traces of those two, since they did not even think about erasing them. After some time, the brunette managed to recognize another footprint. Although they were carefully hidden, there was undoubtedly a third person there. The man realized that the lady really wasn't lying. The only problem was how to find out. Ferris decided to walk to the end of the secret corridor and exit through the regent's room. Carefully closing the doors behind him, he froze for a second. To his great surprise, Prince Caesar was seated in front of him. Grinning, he said that he did not expect to see him here. The gentleman added that if he didn't know Ferris, he would have suspected him of having a relationship with the woman everyone was talking about. The man did not react to the prince's words. Looking down, he asked what made him come here. Caesar confidently stated that his goal was to meet with Carrion. However, he did not expect to see an old acquaintance here. The smug prince reported that he thought Ferris had been demoted and sent to the countryside. The brunette clenched his teeth tightly. He stated that Regent Carrion had reinstated him. The blonde guy replied that he would have done the same thing. Ferris was the best knight of this country. The first prince would still be alive if the man had been in the palace from the very beginning. The brunette turned to Prince Caesar with caution. Without giving him a chance to finish his statement, he interrupted him. The man was aware that discussion of this topic was prohibited. He simply sought to know the reason for his return to the palace. Suddenly, the gentleman quickly rose from his chair. He said that Carrion was late, so he would have to meet him again. Having already opened the doors, Caesar announced that he was waiting for another party to which he had been invited. Then a characteristic click was heard, and silence fell in the room. The lady was darting around the room like a bird in a cage. Her face was concentrated, but her eyes darted, reflecting deep thoughts and doubts. The reason Carrion put her in room 0 was to keep an eye on her. He believed she was a murderer. Leah already thought that the man had other intentions. However, this was not why she felt relieved. The girl lowered her head. She would never commit murder. Then a wave of irritation came over her. Angrily falling onto the sofa, the lady sighed indignantly. She then rested her elbow on the back of the sofa, relaxing. Leah couldn't imagine the punishment for killing a royal. In this country, they could even be executed for insulting the royal family. However, this would not be the case if she stabbed him with a knife. The girl began to think about the reasons that made the regent suspect her. Perhaps he changed his mind about her because of that accident in the garden. Or the man was paranoid. The second assumption seemed completely correct to Leah. The royal family has faced many dangers and life situations throughout history. The problem was that no matter how many times the girl said no, Carrion did not believe her. She did not understand how she could prove her innocence. Then the door to her chambers opened and a maid entered. Placing a stack of books on the table, she said that she had brought everything that the lady had asked for. Leah bowed her head over the stack of 3 textbooks and giggled awkwardly. The girl found it hard to believe that she had to study the law and history of another country. She thought to herself that if she had studied for the college exam like this, she would have been able to get into Seoul University. Then, looking pleased, Ruru asked what else the lady wanted. Looking at the woman, Leah stated that she had a question. It was important for her to know whether strangers could enter the harem. The maid firmly replied that only his representatives had free access. However, due to strict security measures, others were not allowed to enter. Ruru asked why the lady was asking this. She calmly replied that she was just curious. Leah noted to herself that all the maids were one of the local girls. She then turned to Ruru again as she wanted to ask some questions about the recently deceased prince. The darkness of night slowly fell over the surrounding area. One after another, the bright lanterns came on. The luxurious room came to life, becoming even more cozy and mysterious at this evening hour. In addition to the thick books, Leah was lying on the table. She dozed off peacefully, her steady breathing filling the room with calm. Suddenly, a large shadow appeared over the sleeping girl. With a quick wave of his hand, the man took the book from under her head. Unpleasantly hitting her head on the table, the lady screamed. She shuddered and opened her eyes wide, trying to understand what had happened. Rising, Leah indignantly began to rub the sore spot on her temple. Expressing herself angrily, she opened her mouth to ask who acted so rudely. However, her lips froze without uttering a word. Regent Carrion stood in front of her. The man said that a girl should not drool over the scriptures of this country. He asked why she used such books as pillows. The lady's face turned red with embarrassment. She explained that she had been locked in the room all day. Leah added that apart from reading books and sleeping, there were no other activities. Carrion disagreed with her. He proudly declared that there was another option. The girl asked what this could be. The regent said that the lady could make him happy. This is what was the responsibility of the women in the harem. Not expecting to hear this, Leah let out an outrageous laugh. She then stood up, demanding that the man stop his annoying jokes. The girl added that absolutely everyone knew that he was not interested in the harem. These words made Carrion smile involuntarily. The regent asked if this meant that the lady thought so too. She got goosebumps. She realized she had made a mistake and felt the need to change the subject as quickly as possible. Leah awkwardly explained that that wasn't exactly what she meant. In any case, after their conversation this morning, she had a desire to know something more. The girl suggested that the ruler suspected her of murdering the first prince. Surprise showed on his face. Frowning, Carrion asked who she heard it from. These words convinced the lady that her guess was correct. The regent then dryly stated that the incident had nothing to do with her. She began to contradict the man because it was she who was suspected here. Leah was already starting to get angry that she had been kidnapped and framed for a crime. The girl did not at all like the fact that she could easily be executed in a foreign country thousands of miles from home. Carrion remembered Fares's words. Returning from a small investigation, he claimed that the lady had not lied. The man was sure that there were traces of another person in the passage. Leah began to talk about how she had no choice but to prove her innocence. She didn't know anyone in this country who could help her. The regent asked what the girl was trying to say. Looking at the floor, she replied that she wanted to make a deal with him. The ruler, intrigued, asked what kind of agreement was being discussed. His eyes showed genuine interest and curiosity. The lady stated that she was ready to help the man find the criminal. She realized that it would be difficult for him to conduct an open investigation if the villain was in the harem. Carrion was amazed. He asked if Leah could really find the killer. She replied that she had been in her chambers all day. The regent had nothing to lose. The ruler understood that when concluding such a deal, the girl expected something in return. He politely asked what she wanted. The lady said that if she finds the culprit and everything is settled, Carrion is obliged to allow her to leave this country. The ruler and his personal guard were in his office. The ruler told Faraz in detail about the deal that the lady proposed, explaining all of it and the conditions. The regent, with an expression of boredom, lazily asked him what he thought about this. His gaze was tired, and the corners of his mouth were barely noticeably downturned. The man shuddered and asked Carrion what exactly he wanted to consult about. A slight worry showed on his face. With his fist on his cheek, Carrion replied that they were talking about the so-called deal. Quickly recovering, Faraz said that the girl acted wisely. They did not have free access to the harem. Therefore, the investigation would likely be limited. The man added that they also would not be able to avoid suspicion. Then, in a serious voice, he said that another problem had recently arisen. This statement caught Carrion's attention. The regent chuckled involuntarily. He said that this would definitely become a problem. Then the man exhaled heavily, realizing the scale of the disaster. The ruler said that Prince Caesar also returned a few days ago. In this situation, war could certainly break out between them. Faraz lowered his gaze. He noted that Carrion knew little about Prince Aram since they had never crossed paths. Without allowing the interlocutor to finish, the regent suggested that the man was vile, vicious, and cruel. He was aware that the brunette suspected him of organizing the previous incident. Faraz added that traditionalists were fully behind the prince. He was sure that from that moment on he would begin to find fault with everything. This will also touch on Carrion's leadership and masculinity. Perhaps Aram did the same with the deceased first prince. The ruler was surprised by the mention of masculinity in this context. His eyebrows raised slightly, expressing surprise. Faraz explained that recently there had been bad rumors circulating around the palace. Therefore, the prince was definitely going to use this weakness against him. The regent's face began to take on a confident expression. He realized that the man was hinting to him to use this girl. He did not answer his guess. Carrion remembered the mistress's words that he was not interested in the harem. Gradually, he began to guess what the old king was up to. However, there were other ways. Morning came and the sky turned light blue, heralding the start of a new day. Despite this, the buildings still stood in shadow, casting long, dark silhouettes onto the streets. Gradually, light began to creep in through the windows, filling the space with warmth. In this gentle morning light, the lady woke up. Leah slowly moved to the edge of the bed. Her gaze was sleepy and absent-minded. Carrion's words about how he was going to think about her proposal were still running through his head. This irritated the girl unbearably. Her life was at stake and he seemed to be just having fun. She concluded that he was simply terrible. The lady then assumed that this was Carrion's way of refusing. In other words, maybe he was laughing at her. Leah tried to reassure herself that she was not an expert. All her knowledge was based on movies and TV shows. However, these attempts were unsuccessful. The girl pulled her knees to herself offendedly. She didn't understand what had gone wrong in her life. She was hoping for an internship abroad as a way to escape her boring routine, but things turned out differently. Suddenly, a stomp was heard. An excited maid burst through the door. With a sad expression on her face, Leah asked what was wrong. Ruru reported that Regent Carrion urgently called her to his place. The lady quickly put herself in order and went to the ruler. Entering the room, she saw a man sitting at a table. The girl was surprised to realize that this was his personal account. She expected it to be chic and luxurious, but everything turned out to be quite modest. Leah tensed as the man began to speak. Then he said in a confident tone that he would accept her offer. For a moment she lit up with joy. Hearing "but," the lady frowned. With a smirk, Carrion firmly stated that he too had a condition. The girl objected categorically. The regent raised an irritated eyebrow. He asked why she answered that way without even listening to him. Leah explained that she put herself in extreme danger by agreeing to investigate to find the killer. She thought it was unfair that the man also put forward conditions. The ruler chuckled thoughtfully. Resting his cheek on his hand, he declared that the girl was in no position to refuse. Then Carrion slowly rose to his feet. He reminded the lady that it was she who proposed the deal. With confident steps, the regent gradually approached Leah. He said that if she no longer wants this, then she can spend the rest of her days in his harem. The girl looked at the man silently with wide eyes. The blood seemed to freeze in her veins. It was very mean of him. She had no choice but to accept his condition. Trying to hide her indignation, Leah asked what he wanted. She tried to read the true motive in his eyes. To begin with, Carrion said that this was a secret agreement. After a short pause, the regent continued. He stated that no matter what happens, the lady should not have any feelings. Saying these words, the man came closer to the girl. His lips almost touched hers, and he looked straight into her eyes. Her breath involuntarily caught. Leah anxiously stated that she understood everything. She internally noted that under no circumstances would she fall in love with him. Carrion chuckled contentedly and smiled. Now that they had come to an understanding, he offered to discuss the details of his condition. The lady did not understand what was happening. She felt awkward, as if she was under the control of the regent. However, she had no other choice. Sometime later, in the presence of Ferez, the ruler signed the agreement. The pleasant sound of a pen sliding across paper could be heard. With a satisfied expression on her face, the girl declared that the job was done. She then added that she had one last request. Carrion looked at her with displeasure. The man asked what she wanted. Smiling widely, Leah replied that it was nothing complicated. The regent need not have worried. As it turned out, a little later, the lady asked to go for a walk. The wind whispered among the leaves of the trees, creating a pleasant rustle, and the singing of birds sounded with bright colors against its background. The girl gasped contentedly. Her happiness knew no bounds. She finally felt free because she thought she would suffocate in that room. The terms of the contract did not fully satisfy her, but this could not be avoided. She decided to think about all this tomorrow. Suddenly, from behind the bushes, she heard a piercing cry for help. A woman's voice desperately asked someone to let her go. Tensing, Leah thought that she should have gone and helped. The lady was not sure what she should do. There was probably no one else in the garden. Cold sweat appeared on her face. The girl did not understand why the guards had not yet headed towards the squeal. They should have heard him. After a few seconds, Leah decided to see what was happening there. Peering around the corner, she froze in amazement. In front of her, she saw a picture of a stranger persistently pestering a white-haired girl. He grabbed her wrists, and she desperately tried to resist. The man pressed her tightly to him, grabbing her by the shoulders. The blonde was already beginning to lose strength and was gradually giving up. However, her face still remained stubborn. Leah again remembered how after school she found her mother's half-naked boyfriend at home. And then he started pestering her. The girl froze, an unpleasant noise buzzing in her ears. Shaking her head sharply, she came to her senses. The lady rudely called out to the stranger and ran towards him. Having run up, Leah kicked the man in the back with all her might. She ordered him to stop what he was doing because the young lady did not like it at all. However, the stranger was significantly stronger than the girl and easily threw her away. Having hit the ground pretty hard, the lady tried to come to her senses. She sat there, breathing heavily, feeling a sharp pain throughout her body. The man turned around with a dissatisfied expression, asking who it was. His face expressed obvious irritation and disapproval. The ignoramus was about to say a few rude words, but froze when he saw the girl. He had not seen her before and so asked who she was. Looking at the stranger from under her brows and stuttering, Leah tried to introduce herself. Behind him, she noticed a confused blonde. The lady noted to herself that she looked incredibly attractive. Her hair was long and snow-white and her lips were plump. Leah carefully rose to her feet, brushing dust from her white dress. She proudly declared that it didn't matter what her name was. However, the girl knew one thing for sure. The lady told him no. Straightening up confidently, the man asked how this concerned her. The lady said that this did not play any role. It is natural for a person to help someone who is in danger. The stranger looked at Leah with suspicion and did not answer. He then told Sheila that she was free to go, which was apparently the blonde's name. Bowing slightly, she replied that she was obeying. The lady looked at her skeptically, feeling a bad feeling. The blonde slowly turned around, preparing to leave, and Leah felt a sudden panic. She realized that she should not have interfered in this matter. Not knowing what to do, the lady apologized and decided that it would be better to just leave. However, he told her to stop in a rude tone. The man said that the girl ruined his mood by disturbing them. Putting his hands on his hips, he asked how she was going to fix it. With awkwardness in her voice, Leah asked what he was talking about. He explained that since he had not been home for a long time, he wanted to have some fun with his woman. However, the lady prevented them. The stranger said that in this case she should now take Sheila's place. From his words, the girl concluded that they were in a relationship. In any case, they shouldn't have behaved like that in public. Leah indignantly asked why she should take her place. She thought she had misunderstood him and wanted to leave. However, the man did not let her finish. He grabbed her hand tightly and asked who it belonged to. The lady was surprised by this question. She replied that she had no owner and politely asked him to let go of her wrist. Suddenly, the stranger grabbed Leah and easily threw her onto her back. She didn't even have time to cry out in surprise when her feet left the ground. The girl thought that this guy had gone crazy. She didn't understand what he was doing and told him to let her go immediately. The lady's attempts to escape were unsuccessful. She noted that the man was devilishly strong. Then he just as quickly lowered her to the ground, holding her by the waist. At that moment, Leah felt as if she was starting to fall and could not hold back her scream. The guy looked her straight in the eye and said that he really liked her. His gaze was filled with sincerity. The girl noted with displeasure that she really wanted to kill him. A very familiar voice came from behind. Mr. Carrion sternly told Aram to stop fooling around. Turning around, he turned to his brother with a smile and noted that they had not seen each other for a long time. Leah couldn't hide her surprise. The regent said that he had heard about the upcoming arrival of Aram along with the delegation. With wariness in his voice, the man replied that he liked to make surprises. However, he confirmed that he was not joking about this woman. Carrion looked into his eyes angrily. Then the lady realized that all this time she had not been talking to an impudent commoner. Prince Aram stood in front of her. Leah remembered Ruru's recent short lecture very well. She said that Aram is the son of the second queen, and is now second in line to the throne. He was a strong traditionalist with more support than the young first prince. That explained why the guards didn't do anything despite him causing that scene. The girl wondered if this meant that there was a rivalry between him and Carrion. The regent turned to his brother and said that his behavior was simply intolerable. The ruler then pointed to Leah and added that she was a woman from his harem. The man with the headband just looked at her in surprise. Aram turned to the Almighty and then asked his brother for forgiveness. The lady told him that she had no master. Therefore, he considered that she had no one. Leah watched what was happening with confusion. Her gaze slid over the faces of those gathered until it settled on Cariana. She noticed that his face was distorted with anger. The girl didn't understand why he was angry with her, because she didn't do anything. Her thoughts were confused, trying to find the answer to the question. The regent turned to his brother with a request to show understanding. The mistress was a foreigner, and had not yet become accustomed to their harem culture. Moreover, he did not think that the prince had acted deliberately. Aram looked at him, frowning slightly. He noted that they had not seen each other for a long time, but now he had to go. The man felt tired, probably due to the time difference. The prince came closer to him and with a slight smile on his face, said that they would see each other at the reception. There was reserve in his gaze, and his voice emphasized the tension between them. Leah silently watched their dialogue. She smiled awkwardly, feeling her nervousness rising. If the girl stayed here any longer, Carrion would probably start scolding her. As soon as she turned to leave, a stern voice immediately told her to stop. He then ordered her to come closer to him. The lady returned and in a guilty voice asked why the regent was dissatisfied. She didn't do anything wrong. The man asked where Leah got the idea that he was unhappy. She replied that in that case, let her forget about it. The girl suggested that the ruler must have had a lot to do. Deciding to change the subject, she wanted to ask what brought Carrion here. However, he did not let her finish and asked why she told Aram that she did not have an owner. Changing her tone, Leah responded furiously that she had no owner. The man replied in a calm voice that, according to their contract, he was her employer and master. The lady gave a fierce look. Carrion stated that if she did not like these conditions, she could give up everything and leave right now. He added that he would easily break the contract and annul it. Embarrassed, the girl apologized. She said it came out of her and that she made a mistake. The regent asked what Leah said, and she suddenly repeated her apology loudly, bowing her head. The ruler looked approvingly at the lady. He ordered her to be vigilant and beware of Aram from now on. Carrion then looked down and said there was one thing he didn't understand. The girl asked in surprise what he was talking about. With a serious expression on his face, the regent asked if Leah claimed that she was sick. Without allowing her to answer, the man asked why she did not faint in front of Prince Aram. The lady looked into his eyes in bewilderment, not knowing what to answer. The ruler again asked the question whether she had chosen the person before whom she would fall. Then Carrion noted with displeasure what a convenient disease Leah had. After these words, he quickly turned around and walked away. She just looked at him in confusion. Various guesses flashed through her head, and the girl became embarrassed. Dismissing them, she decided that the regent was simply unhappy. The girl also noticed how strangely he expressed his thoughts. She usually had attacks when the situation was tense, but now she felt fine. The lady couldn't understand what the difference was this time. Leah's head began to pound from her endless thoughts, so she decided to put it off until later. She also wondered why Carrion came to the garden. He probably wanted to tell her something. Walking through the tangled garden, the prince headed directly to the appointed meeting place. Around him there were only green bushes and modest flower beds. Finally, he approached the meeting point and saw a familiar face. The men greeted each other. Aram said that he heard about the return of Faraz. He asked if he was now Carrion's personal security guard. The man answered in the affirmative. The prince noted that he recently met with Carrion. He added that he was not what the rumors described him as. Coming as close as possible to Faraz, Aram whispered that he would have to try to protect the ruler this time. The prince chuckled and said that this was if, of course, he wanted to prevent a repetition of the tragedy that happened in the royal family. Faraz just clenched his teeth in irritation. Ruru happily announced to the lady that all preparations were completed. She then politely asked her to come to her. Carrion put forward several conditions to the girl. One of them was that her appearance should correspond to his status. After all, she was the only woman he chose. Leah believed that under no circumstances could she become extraordinary, especially compared to the beauties of the harem. Who would have believed that of all the luxurious women, the regent chose her? The maid carefully gathered the mistress's long hair into a ponytail. She asked if she really intended to establish relationships with other women. Leah answered in the affirmative. Ruru lightheartedly asked why the girl suddenly decided to change her attitude. She thought about it, trying to find words. She then explained that it was important to take advantage of the chance while it lasted. After all, they all lived here together. Leah asked the maid if it would be better for them to improve their relationship. They couldn't just quarrel all the time. However, the girl needed to join society only to collect information. She could leave this place only after she found and caught the criminal. Looking at the lady, Ruru replied that it was the right decision. The mistress of the harem did not like it when women were jealous of each other. In case of serious conflict, she even punished them. These words shocked Leah. She couldn't believe that she was envied because of Regent Carrion. Then she giggled, unable to bear the absurdity of the situation. Being completely ready, the lady quickly walked towards the exit. Her gorgeous hair flowed behind her like waves, shining in the rays of the sun. The maid looked after Leah with concern. It was quite obvious that she was not going there with the intention of making friends. Faraz was in the regent's chambers next to him. His impartial gaze was directed into emptiness. The words of threat from Prince Aram were spinning in his head, and he sincerely did not know what to do. Carrion was telling him something and then asked a question that required an answer. However, he ignored all the words. Finally, the ruler addressed Faraz by name, as if checking to see if he was alive. The man winced and returned to reality, apologizing to him. He quickly realized that the regent was talking about Lady Leah. Faraz reported that, according to her maid, from that day on she was going to attend social events. This statement surprised Carrion. He couldn't figure out what the girl was going to do there, given her personality. He could only hope that she wouldn't become a source of trouble. The guard raised an eyebrow slightly. He asked if he was worried about his mistress. The ruler asked, puzzled, how such an idea could even come to his mind. The man explained that the regent had been looking at the same page for quite some time. Carrion looked down awkwardly, letting out a long sigh. Faraz suggested sending someone to secretly keep an eye on Lady Leah if the ruler was so worried. He looked at him with slight doubt in his eyes, waiting for a reaction. The regent immediately rejected this idea. He stated that there was no need for it. Closing the book, the man added that the fewer people knew about it, the better. In addition, the girl herself decided to work for them. She was well aware of the possible risks. Carrion assumed that everything would be revealed as soon as someone got close to her. The ruler looked thoughtfully out the window. He believed that his feeling of anxiety was nothing more than regret for wasting time. Leah stood there devastated, her head lowered in defeat. Her mission today was a complete failure. All the women treated her as if she didn't exist at all. In addition, they constantly cast sidelong glances at her. The lady assumed that they were simply afraid of her. Whenever she approached them, the girls quickly turned around and walked away. Their behavior infuriated Leah. She didn't understand what she had done wrong to deserve such treatment. Having abandoned this idea, she wondered which of the girls was the killer. Without waiting for the end of the event, the lady decided to leave. Walking slowly along the long arched corridor, she sighed heavily, looking at the floor. The girl sadly noted that conducting an investigation is not an easy job. She expected it to be difficult, but she still wasn't ready for it. Her train of thoughts was suddenly interrupted by a strange sensation. Leah felt someone's gaze fixed on her, watching her every move. She suggested that perhaps it was the man from the secret passage. The lady promised herself that this time she would not let him leave. The girl quickly ran up to one of the columns. What she saw made her scream, dumbfounded from surprise. Behind the arch sat a crying woman, who also screamed, frightened. Involuntarily stuttering, she asked what Leah wanted from her. Getting nervous, the lady asked if she had not been following her. Holding back tears, the girl replied that she was just hiding. She added that she really wanted to cry because she was homesick. Leah sincerely apologized for scaring her. She, in turn, reassured the lady, saying that everything was fine and that she was now going to leave. The girl watched as the crying lady slowly walked away. She was absolutely sure that she had seen her here for the first time. Leah turned around and became lost in thought. She had an uneasy feeling that she had missed something important. The girl could not understand what exactly it could be. Suddenly, the lady turned around, remembering that she should have hastened. She assumed that Regent Carrion was probably already waiting for her in his chambers. As soon as Leah walked away, a blond man appeared from behind another column. He turned out to be Prince Caesar, who had been secretly watching her all this time. The man, dressed in black trousers and a white wrinkled shirt, moved as silently as possible. He followed the crying girl who walked ahead, suspecting nothing.